Rachel had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at the city hospital. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, and all she wanted was to get home, kick off her shoes, and not think about anything or anyone. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows on the quiet neighborhood street she always took home. As she passed the neighborhood corner store, something caught her eye. A large German shepherd, standing utterly still near a storm drain. Its coat was sleek, almost shiny under the flickering streetlight. But what truly stopped her wasn't its appearance. It was the expression on its face. The dog wasn't begging or barking. It wasn't wagging its tail. It just stood there, perfectly still, staring into the drain with a look of pure sorrow. Rachel slowed down without realizing it. Their eyes met for a brief second. There was something in his gaze. Not fear, not aggression, but a kind of sadness that tugged at something deep inside her. She considered approaching, but quickly dismissed the thought. Maybe its owner was nearby. Maybe it was just curious. After all, it wasn't her problem. She turned away and continued walking, trying to push the strange encounter from her mind. But even as she reached her front door, the image lingered. A dog, alone, staring into the dark as if waiting for something. Or someone. The next evening, Rachel found herself taking the same route home, part habit, part curiosity. As she turned the corner, her heart skipped a beat. The German shepherd was still there, standing in the exact same spot, gazing down into the storm drain with that same haunted expression. This time, something felt different. The air around him seemed heavier, the stillness more deliberate. Rachel slowed her pace and observed him from a distance. He didn't bark or run. Instead, he glanced at her cautiously, then returned his attention to the drain, as if guarding something important. She stepped into the store to pick up a few things, some bread, a bottle of milk, but as she browsed the aisles, her thoughts kept drifting to the dog. On impulse, she grabbed a pack of beef jerky and a small box of treats from the pet section. When she exited the store, the dog was still there. She crouched down several feet away and gently set the food on the sidewalk. "It's okay," she whispered, trying not to startle him. "You must be hungry." The German shepherd didn't move. He watched her quietly, eyes guarded. Rachel stepped back to give him space. After a few tense moments, he approached the food, but instead of eating it, he gently picked up one treat at a time and carried it to the drain, then carefully pushed it through the metal grates. Rachel froze. One piece, then another and another. Every single treat disappeared into the darkness below. She stood there, stunned. This wasn't a dog looking for food. This was something else entirely. That night, long after the streetlights flickered off and the world outside fell quiet, Rachel lay awake, the image of the German shepherd haunting her thoughts like a shadow clinging to memory. She couldn't shake the feeling that the dog wasn't just a stray. It was mourning, guarding, or maybe both. The memory triggered something deeper within her, something she hadn't thought about in years. As a child, Rachel had always wanted a dog. Not just any dog. She dreamed of a loyal companion to follow her everywhere, curl up by her side, and be her best friend. She used to clip pictures from magazines of golden retrievers and German shepherds, taping them to her bedroom wall like a vision board for a life she didn't have. But Rachel's world was small. Her mother, a waitress working double shifts to keep food on the table, simply couldn't afford to care for a pet. No matter how many times Rachel begged, her mother's answer was gentle but firm. "One day, when life isn't so hard," she'd say with a tired smile. Eventually, Rachel stopped asking. She grew up quickly. Reality had a way of dulling childhood dreams. Her mother's health declined, and Rachel devoted herself to nursing, a career built around caring for others, maybe because that's what she'd always seen at home. The dream of having a dog faded into the background, like an old song she used to hum but no longer remembered the lyrics to. 2 years ago, Rachel's world fell apart. Her mother had been battling cancer for nearly a year when the doctors finally said there was nothing more they could do. Rachel moved her into their small apartment, turned the living room into a care space, and poured every ounce of energy into keeping her mother comfortable. The strong, resilient woman who had once worked endless hours to raise her was now fading before her eyes. Rachel hardly slept. She lost weight. Every cent of her paycheck went to medications, appointments, and whatever might bring even a moment of relief, and yet there was never enough time. When her mother passed, Rachel was holding her hand. The moment was quiet, almost peaceful, but inside, Rachel shattered. She didn't just lose a parent. She lost her only family, her safe place, her anchor. That night, after returning home from the hospital, Rachel unlocked her front door with trembling hands. But before she could step inside, she froze. Lying curled up on the doormat was a dog, skinny, soaked from the rain, its fur matted and ears drooping. A stray. It looked up at her with eyes so deeply sorrowful that it startled her. It didn't bark. It didn't move. It simply stared as if saying, "I know your pain." Rachel didn't have the energy to shoo it away. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, assuming it would leave by morning. That night, sleep refused to come. Rachel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence in her apartment almost unbearable. Her mother's absence filled every corner. Every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture, every scent reminded her of what she had lost. Grief pressed on her chest like a weight she couldn't lift. Around midnight, she heard a soft, persistent bark outside her window. At first, she ignored it, assuming the stray had moved on. But it didn't stop. The barking wasn't loud or aggressive. It was gentle, almost pleading. She got up, wrapped herself in a blanket, and opened the door. There, shivering on the porch, was the same dog. His fur was soaked, his nose runny, and he looked exhausted. Rain still fell lightly, and the wind carried a chill that bit into the skin. Something inside Rachel cracked. Without thinking, she stepped aside and opened the door wider. The dog hesitated, then slowly walked in, cautious but desperate. He made his way straight to the small fireplace, curled up in front of it as if he belonged there, and let out a long, trembling sigh. Rachel found an old towel, dried him off as best she could, and placed a blanket over his body. Then she sat beside him, legs crossed, staring at the flames. She didn't cry. She just sat there in the flickering light with a stranger who somehow understood exactly how she felt. In that quiet moment, something wordless passed between them. Grief, recognition, and maybe even comfort. By morning, Rachel didn't even consider making him leave. He was still there, sleeping peacefully, and for the first time in days, her apartment didn't feel entirely empty. He stayed, and so did the fragile peace that began to grow between them. She named him Hope. It wasn't a decision she made quickly. For days, the dog simply existed in her space, quiet, respectful, and never demanding. He didn't destroy anything. He didn't bark unnecessarily. He just followed her from room to room, resting near her feet, as though silently promising not to leave. Rachel felt no pressure to name him, but something about his presence reminded her of what she needed most in that moment: hope. So one morning, as he sat beside her while she drank coffee by the window, she whispered it. Hope. His ears perked up, and his tail gave a slow, gentle wag, as if he understood. From that day on, Hope became her constant companion. He walked beside her through the dull ache of grief. On days she couldn't find the strength to get out of bed, he nudged her gently with his nose, resting his head on her chest until she found the courage to stand. He didn't ask anything of her. He simply stayed, present, patient, and loyal. They healed together, slowly. But healing is never linear. One crisp autumn evening, Rachel came home from work, expecting Hope to greet her at the door like always, tail wagging, eyes shining, but he wasn't inside. Panicked, she rushed outside and found the gate ajar. That wasn't like her. She was always careful. Her heart sank. Then she saw him, on the other side of the street, tail wagging with excitement as he spotted her. "Hope!" she called, running toward him. But he was too excited. He ran toward her without noticing the speeding car. It happened in a blur of screeching tires and blinding headlights. In that split second, as Hope's body crumpled onto the pavement, Rachel felt the world collapse around her. Time slowed to a crawl. Her scream ripped from a place so raw it startled even herself. She dropped to her knees, gathered his limp body into her arms, and rocked him as if trying to bring him back with the rhythm of her grief. His eyes, once so full of life, now stared blankly, and that silence was louder than any sound she had ever heard. It was the kind of pain that didn't just break you, it hollowed you out. Rachel sobbed until her throat burned. The guilt was immediate and consuming. If only she had double-checked the gate. If only she'd gotten home a few minutes earlier. If only... That night, she sat in the same spot where they once curled up together, holding the collar he used to wear, and made herself a promise through the tears. Never again. She would never open her heart to another animal. Not after Hope. By morning, Rachel hadn't slept a minute. The weight of old memories and the image of that German shepherd lingered in her chest like an echo she couldn't silence. As she walked the same familiar path back from work, her eyes searched for him, unsure why, but hoping he'd still be there. He was. Now, as Rachel stood once again before the storm drain, staring at the German shepherd who hadn't moved in days, something inside her stirred, something both familiar and painful. She had thought she was past this, past the ache, past the longing, past the fragile hope that animals could help fill the holes life had carved into her. But here it was again, that haunting gaze, that quiet presence, that sense that this wasn't just a dog begging for food. The image of Hope flashed through her mind, so vivid it almost made her stagger. The way he used to tilt his head, the weight of his body pressed gently against her at night, the sound of his paws on the hardwood floor. All of it came rushing back like a wave she hadn't braced for. She had assumed the shepherd was just hungry, but watching him gently slide every piece of food through the metal grates into the darkness below, not eating a single bite, told her otherwise. Rachel stepped forward cautiously, trying to peek into the drain, but the dog snapped to attention, letting out a sharp, warning bark. His stance was protective, defensive, and unmistakably clear. Stay back. Rachel froze. Whatever he was guarding, it wasn't something he was willing to share. Not yet. She took a step back and exhaled slowly. If she was going to understand this, whatever this was, she'd have to earn his trust. And that, she knew from experience, would take time. Rachel knew what she had to do. She couldn't force her way into the mystery. The shepherd was guarding something, someone, and trust, the kind that mattered, didn't come quickly. It had to be earned, step by step, in silence with consistency. She began the very next day. When her shift ended, she stopped by the corner store, bought the same brand of treats, and walked quietly to the drain. The German shepherd was there, just as she expected, standing sentry like a loyal soldier. He didn't wag his tail, didn't move toward her, but he didn't bark this time either. That, in itself, felt like progress. She knelt down a few feet away and placed the treats in a neat little pile, just as she had before. "I'm not here to take anything," she whispered. "Just saying hi." Then, she took a few slow steps back. The dog watched her. His eyes followed her retreat, but eventually, he turned to the food, picked it up gently in his mouth, and, just like before, slid it down into the drain. Rachel didn't stop him. She just watched. And she came back the next day, and the next, and the next. Each time, she brought treats. Each time, she called him the name she had quietly given him in her mind, Shadow, for his glossy black and tan fur, and the way he moved like a flicker on the edge of vision. By the end of the week, something had shifted. When he saw her coming, his ears perked up. His eyes lit with recognition. His tail gave the slightest wag. He was waiting for her now, and somehow that meant everything. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Rachel first met Shadow, and by now their silent routine had become a part of her life. Each afternoon, she would arrive with treats. Each afternoon, he would take a few, nudge the rest into the drain, and glance up at her with those gentle amber eyes. like he was asking her to trust what she couldn't yet see. But Rachel couldn't stop wondering what was down there. She still hadn't gotten a clear look. Every time she tried to move closer, Shadow's body would stiffen. He didn't growl anymore, but his message remained firm, not yet. Until one evening, when he finally let her stay close. Rachel sat just a few feet from the grate, Shadow calmly beside her, chewing one of the treats. She leaned forward, peered into the darkness. Nothing. But then she listened, really listened. A faint whimper, then another. Her heart caught in her throat. She pressed her ear against the metal bars. This time, she heard it clearly. The soft, helpless cries of puppies. Without wasting a second, she pulled out her phone and called the fire department. Her voice trembled as she explained everything. The dog, the drain, the sounds. They arrived quickly. With Rachel pointing them to the exact spot, the team pried open the heavy grate. One of the firefighters climbed down with a flashlight. A moment later, he called out, "One here!" Then another, and another. In the end, they rescued 5 tiny puppies, curled up together in the corner of the dark, damp pipe. Malnourished, frightened, and shivering, but alive. Rachel sat on the curb as the firefighters lifted the last puppy from the drain. The tiny creatures were wrapped in towels, weak but safe. One let out a soft yelp and another nuzzled into a rescuer's arm, too tired to be afraid. The sight was overwhelming, a mix of heartbreak and awe. Shadow stood beside her, tail wagging gently, his eyes never leaving the puppies. For the first time, Rachel saw him not as a mystery, but as a protector, a guardian who had gone hungry day after day, not for himself, but for those who couldn't survive without him. She reached down and stroked his head. "You saved them," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved them all." That night, after the puppies were taken to a nearby clinic for care, Rachel didn't hesitate. She opened the passenger door of her car and patted the seat. "Come on, Shadow," she said. He jumped in without a second of doubt. It was the first time she had let a dog into her home since Hope, and it felt right. Over the next few weeks, Shadow settled into her life as if he had always belonged there. They took long walks, napped by the fire, and shared quiet mornings filled with peace instead of pain. Rachel laughed again, really laughed, and each time she did, Shadow wagged his tail like he understood the victory in that simple sound. Eventually, she made it official. She adopted him. The puppies all found loving homes, each one safe because of the dog who refused to walk away. And as Rachel stood in her doorway one evening, watching Shadow sleep peacefully at her feet, she realized something. Hope hadn't really left her. He had simply come back, not as a memory, but as a second chance. The streets of Chicago were nearly deserted, blanketed by a thick layer of snow. The biting wind howled through the narrow alleyways, cutting through even the thickest of clothing. Streetlights flickered dimly, casting a pale glow on the icy pavement. In a secluded alley, Lucas, a young homeless boy, huddled against a brick wall. His body trembled beneath the weight of the bitter cold, his thin, worn-out jacket doing little to shield him from the unforgiving winter night. His stomach ached with hunger, but he was too exhausted to care. People walked past the alleyway, their faces buried in their scarves, too preoccupied with their own lives to notice the shivering boy. Lucas had long stopped expecting kindness from strangers. Just as he was about to close his eyes, trying to ignore the numbing cold, a faint movement caught his attention. From the shadows, a German shepherd emerged, its fur matted with dirt and patches of ice clinging to its coat. The dog trembled, clearly just as cold and hungry as Lucas. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two lost souls, abandoned by the world, meeting in the dead of winter. Lucas hesitated, his frozen fingers gripping the edges of his thin jacket. He knew what it was like to be cold, to be alone, to feel invisible. As he looked into the dog's deep brown eyes, he saw the same exhaustion, the same silent plea for warmth and safety. Carefully, he reached out his hand, but the dog flinched slightly, stepping back. Lucas didn't blame it. He had learned the hard way that trust wasn't given easily. "I won't hurt you," he murmured, his breath visible in the freezing air. Slowly, he shrugged off his jacket, the only thing shielding him from the brutal wind. Ignoring the biting chill, he draped it gently over the shivering German shepherd. The dog remained still, watching him with wary but curious eyes. To his surprise, after a few moments, the dog stepped forward and pressed its body against him, sharing what little warmth they had. A faint smile flickered across Lucas's chapped lips. "Guess we're both stuck out here, huh?" he whispered. The dog didn't respond, of course, but its steady breathing was strangely comforting. Lucas rested his head against the cold brick wall, his eyelids growing heavy. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't completely alone. When morning came, the streets of Chicago slowly came to life, with people rushing to work, their boots crunching against the snow. Lucas shivered as he stirred awake, but something warm was still pressed against him. The dog hadn't left. Lucas looked at it, a small spark of gratitude lighting up his otherwise weary expression. If this dog had no one else, and neither did he, maybe they could stick together. He reached out and gently patted its head. "I think I'll call you Rusty. That sound good to you?" The dog thumped its tail against the snow. Lucas grinned. "All right then, Rusty. Let's find something to eat." And with that, the two unlikely companions set off together, ready to face another day. Lucas and Rusty wandered through the bustling streets of Chicago, the morning sun doing little to warm their frozen bodies. The city was alive with people rushing to work, the scent of fresh coffee and pastries lingering in the air, a cruel reminder of the hunger gnawing at Lucas's stomach. He stopped at a familiar spot near a busy intersection, a place where street performers often gathered. Lucas wasn't a musician or a dancer, but he had a small talent: drawing. With a piece of charcoal and scraps of paper he had collected from old newspapers and discarded notebooks, he knelt on the cold pavement and began sketching. Rusty sat beside him, watching passers-by with keen eyes. His presence alone seemed to draw attention. People who might have ignored a homeless boy now paused, intrigued by the well-behaved German shepherd sitting loyally by his side. A woman in a thick coat stopped, glancing at Lucas's drawing. A rough but impressive sketch of Rusty. She smiled and dropped a few coins into the old coffee cup beside him. "That's really good," she said before walking away. Lucas blinked in surprise. It had been a long time since someone complimented him. Encouraged, he kept drawing. With each sketch, of Rusty, of passing strangers, of the cityscape, more people stopped. Some dropped coins, others gave him small bills. It wasn't much, but it was more than he usually earned. Rusty, seemingly aware of his role in this, wagged his tail and occasionally nudged Lucas's hand as if to say, "Keep going." By the end of the afternoon, Lucas had enough money to buy a hot meal for himself and Rusty. He walked into a small corner store, bought a sandwich, and, with the last of his money, a can of dog food. Back in their alley, he tore the sandwich in half and placed the open can in front of Rusty. "Not much of a feast, but it's better than nothing," he said with a tired smile. Rusty didn't hesitate, eating eagerly. Lucas watched him, feeling something unfamiliar. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. For the first time in a long while, Lucas felt like he had something, a purpose, a routine, and a friend. Every morning, he and Rusty would head to their spot near the intersection. Lucas would sketch, and Rusty, with his calm and noble demeanor, would draw people in. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get by. But not everyone in the city was kind. One evening, as Lucas and Rusty were heading back to their usual alley, a group of 3 young men appeared from the shadows. Their clothes were worn, their eyes sharp and calculating. Lucas recognized them, street thugs who preyed on the weak. He had seen them harass others before, but he had always kept his head down, staying out of trouble. "Hey, kid," one of them sneered, stepping closer. "Been seeing you making a little cash lately?" Lucas tensed, gripping his sketchbook tightly. "I don't want any trouble," he said, keeping his voice steady. Another thug, taller and bulkier, smirked. "Yeah, well, we do?" Before Lucas could react, one of them lunged forward, shoving him against the brick wall. His head hit the cold surface, making him momentarily dizzy. "Let's see what you got," the third one muttered, reaching for Lucas's pockets. But before his fingers could even touch the money, a deep, menacing growl filled the alley. Rusty launched himself at the attacker, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's arm. The thug let out a scream, stumbling back as Rusty snarled, his body tense and ready to strike again. "Get this damn dog off me!" the man shrieked, struggling to free himself. The second thug tried to kick Rusty away, but the German Shepherd was too fast. He dodged, then snapped at the man's leg, forcing him to stumble back. Rusty's barks echoed through the alley, fierce, protective, unyielding. Lucas, despite his fear, saw his chance. He grabbed his sketchbook and swung it as hard as he could at the third thug's face. The man cursed, momentarily distracted. The first thug, now bleeding from Rusty's bite, grabbed a metal pipe lying nearby. "Stupid mutt," he roared, raising it above his head. Lucas's heart clenched in terror. Rusty wouldn't back down. He was ready to fight to the end. The thug swung the metal pipe downward, aiming for Rusty's side. Lucas screamed, his body reacting before his mind could process. But Rusty was faster. He dodged, then lunged, sinking his teeth into the man's wrist. The thug howled in pain, dropping the pipe with a loud clatter. Rusty held on, his growl deep and unrelenting, refusing to let go. Lucas scrambled to his feet, grabbing the pipe before the thug could reclaim it. His hands shook, but he stood his ground. Then, the distant sound of police sirens cut through the air. Someone must have heard the commotion and called for help. The thugs panicked. "Forget it, let's go," one of them barked. Within seconds, they disappeared into the night, their curses fading into the distance. Lucas collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. Rusty, despite his own injuries, limped toward him, licking his face as if to say, "You're safe now." Tears stung Lucas's eyes. He wrapped his arms around Rusty, holding him tightly. "You saved me," he whispered. "You really saved me." But Rusty's body was trembling. Blood stained his golden fur where the pipe had grazed him. He was hurt. Lucas knew he had to find help fast. Lucas's hands trembled as he gently ran them over Rusty's fur, feeling the warmth of fresh blood against his fingertips. The German Shepherd let out a low whimper but still pressed his head against Lucas's chest, as if reassuring him that he was okay. But he wasn't okay. Lucas felt panic rising in his chest. He had no money left, no way to take Rusty to a vet. He couldn't lose his only friend. Just as despair threatened to consume him, a voice called out, "Is everything all right?" Lucas turned sharply to see an older woman standing at the alley's entrance. She had short silver hair, a thick coat wrapped around her, and sharp, observant eyes that immediately focused on Rusty. She stepped closer, and Lucas instinctively moved between her and the wounded dog. "I saw what happened," she continued, her voice firm but kind. "Your dog. He fought for you." Lucas hesitated, unsure if he could trust her, but then she knelt, slowly extending her hand toward Rusty. The dog, despite his pain, didn't growl or flinch. Instead, he let out a weak sigh and rested his head on the cold pavement. "I can help," she said gently. "My name is Eleanor Dawson. I used to train search and rescue dogs." Lucas's eyes widened. Search and rescue dogs? That explained why she knew exactly how to approach Rusty. "I don't have any money," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor smiled slightly. "I'm not asking for money. I just want to help your friend." She pulled out a small first aid kit from her bag and carefully began cleaning Rusty's wound. The dog flinched but didn't resist. Her hands were steady, practiced. She had clearly done this before. "Come with me," she finally said, looking at Lucas. "I have a place where you can both stay, somewhere warm." Lucas looked at Rusty, at his injuries, at the kindness in Eleanor's eyes. For the first time in years, he had a choice: to trust or to run. He exhaled shakily, then nodded. "Okay." And with that, Lucas and Rusty followed Eleanor out of the alley, toward a chance at something better. Eleanor led Lucas and Rusty through the dimly lit streets, away from the cold alley that had been their shelter for so long. Lucas remained tense, still unsure if trusting this woman was the right choice. But Rusty, despite his injuries, walked beside her without hesitation, as if he sensed something in her that Lucas couldn't yet see. After a few blocks, they arrived at a modest but cozy house, its porch light casting a warm glow against the snow-covered ground. Inside, the scent of wood and something faintly familiar, perhaps coffee or old books, filled the air. Eleanor motioned for Lucas to sit on the couch while she fetched supplies. Rusty, exhausted from the night's events, curled up on the floor next to him, his tail thumping weakly against the rug. "You can rest here," Eleanor said as she returned with a proper first aid kit. "But I'd like to take Rusty to the vet tomorrow. He needs more care than I can give him at home." Lucas hesitated. The idea of handing Rusty over to someone else, even for medical help, made him uneasy. But then he saw the genuine concern in Eleanor's expression. She wasn't trying to take Rusty away, she truly wanted to help. "Okay," he murmured. As Eleanor bandaged Rusty's wounds, she glanced at Lucas. "You two make a good team," she remarked. "How long have you been on the streets?" Lucas hesitated before answering. "A couple of years," he admitted. "Since I was 10? Eleanor's face softened, but she didn't press for details. Instead, she simply said, "You have a way with animals. That's not something everyone has." Lucas frowned. "What do you mean?" Eleanor smiled knowingly. "I trained search and rescue dogs for 20 years. I can tell when someone has a natural connection with them." She glanced at Rusty. "And that dog would do anything for you. That kind of trust doesn't happen by accident." Lucas looked at Rusty, who was now dozing peacefully. Had he really been the one helping Rusty, or had Rusty been the one saving him all along? The next morning, Lucas woke up to the unfamiliar feeling of warmth. For the first time in years, he wasn't greeted by the harsh cold or the discomfort of concrete beneath him. Instead, he was on a soft couch, a blanket draped over him. Rusty lay beside him, his body rising and falling steadily as he slept. Lucas sat up, rubbing his eyes. The scent of fresh coffee and toast filled the air, making his stomach growl. He wasn't used to waking up to food. Usually, the first thought in his mind was how he would find his next meal. "Good morning," Eleanor's voice came from the kitchen. She glanced at him with a small smile. "There's food on the table. Eat up." Lucas hesitated, but Rusty, now awake, trotted over and nudged his leg as if encouraging him. With a quiet thanks, he sat down and took a bite, his first proper breakfast in years. After they ate, Eleanor grabbed her coat. "Come on," she said. "We need to get Rusty checked out." At the vet's office, Rusty remained calm, letting the doctor examine his wounds. The vet, impressed by his temperament, asked, "Has he had training before?" "He listens well." Eleanor and Lucas exchanged a look. Rusty had never had formal training, but he had always understood Lucas without words. On the way home, Eleanor spoke up. "Lucas, have you ever thought about working with dogs?" Lucas frowned. "What do you mean?" Eleanor smiled. "I used to train search and rescue dogs, and I see something in you, a natural ability to connect with them." She glanced at Rusty. "That kind of bond, it's rare." Lucas looked down at Rusty, who walked confidently beside him, his ears perked up despite his injuries. "I never really thought about it," he admitted. "Well," Eleanor continued, "if you want, I can teach you. Not just how to care for dogs, but how to train them, to give them purpose, just like they give us purpose." Lucas didn't know what to say. No one had ever offered him something like this before. A real skill, a future. He had spent so long just trying to survive, the idea of actually building something for himself felt almost impossible. But then he looked at Rusty, the dog who had fought for him, protected him, never left his side. Maybe it was time for him to fight for something too. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, I want to learn." Eleanor smiled. "Then let's get started." That day, Lucas's life changed, not because he was rescued, but because he finally had a chance to take control of his own future. And he wasn't alone. He had Rusty by his side. Months passed, and Lucas's life transformed in ways he never imagined. Under Eleanor's guidance, he learned how to train dogs, how to understand their behavior, and how to communicate with them in ways most people couldn't. Rusty, once just a stray, became more than a companion. He became a working dog, trained in search and rescue techniques. The bond between them only grew stronger. One day, Eleanor took Lucas to a local animal rescue center, introducing him to the team. "This is Lucas," she told them. "He's got a talent for working with dogs. The manager, impressed by what Eleanor had told him, gave Lucas a chance. It wasn't just a job, it was a future. A year later, Lucas wasn't the same homeless boy sleeping in an alley. He had a stable place to live, a real skill, and most importantly, a purpose. He worked with rescue dogs, training them to help others, just as Rusty had helped him. One evening, as he sat outside with Rusty, watching the sunset, he gently patted the German Shepherd's head. "We made it, buddy," he whispered. Rusty wagged his tail, his eyes filled with the same unwavering loyalty as the night they first met. Because in the end, they had saved each other.